Shalom, friends. Today I'm very excited because I get to learn with a special high holiday chavruta. This year I got to do some learning with the incredible people at the Jewish Learning Collaborative, and I highly recommend them if you are interested in customized one-on-one Jewish learning, which I was. And that is actually how I met Avidan, who is my chavruta for today. He is the associate director of JLC and chavruta matchmaker. Shalom, Avidan.
Shalom, Miriam. So happy to be here.
Let's set the stage for what we're going to be learning today. Right now, we're having this convo in a very special time of the calendar year, the calendar cycle, the month of Elul that leads up to the high holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and the spiritual stakes could not be higher. So there are all these traditions to help people get in the right spiritual headspace. One phrase that's pretty well known about Elul is during Elul, the king is in the field. But where does that saying, that phrase, come from? What does it even mean? What king? We can guess, but what king or what field? What's going on? Explain what we're up to, and then let's do some text exploration.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. This idea of the king being in the field, we can trace back to a teaching from the first rabbi of the Chabad movement. Lots of people know the seventh rabbi of the Chabad movement, sometimes known as the Rebbe, Menachem Mendel Schneerson. But he comes from a long line in this Chabad movement, which is part of the broader movement of Hasidism, Hasidut, that is characterized by these sermons, by these teachings that really bring meaning and interconnectivity, intertextuality to the time of year we're in, to the parsha we're reading in the Torah cycle at the time, and really across the whole Jewish canon and beyond. This phrase of the king being in the field comes from the first rabbi of Chabad, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, second half of the 18th century, from one of his teachings that I'm really excited to dig into together today.
Let's get into a Hasidic headspace.
There's a couple sort of like the associative or symbolic matrix that we're in,
Yeah.
just to name a couple things. One is that it's very associative, right? So we're going to go from this verse and that image, and that is there's an idea in Hasidic teachings about the aspect or the illusions that aren't necessarily obvious from the text, but that share an energy, share a spirit. And so we're basically jumping into this like associative network of spirits, of spiritual connections. It opens with a quote from the Song of Songs. I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. In Hebrew, Ani lidodi vidodi li. It opens by pointing out that if you take the first letters of each of those four words, it spells out Elul, the month that we're in. And he says this is an allusion to an arousal from below that occurs until you get to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which then themselves will draw down godliness into this world from above in sort of an all-consuming, overwhelming revelation.
I'm just going to go ahead and point out the obvious, which is that this is very sexual. But that makes sense because it's from the Song of Songs, which is scandalous. A lot of people know that phrase, Ani lidodi vidodi li, I am my beloved, and my beloved is mine. It's a very romantic thing to say. A lot of people have it on their wedding bands, on their ketubot. But allegorically speaking, this has been used to describe the relationship between God and the Jewish people as opposed to human lovers. But you get the gist. It's romantic.
Classically, right, the Song of Songs was understood as this analogy for love between God and Israel. And this is another instantiation of that tradition.
And just like in real life, you can't stay on Hinge forever. You actually have to go on a date. You have to go dance in a vineyard and meet your future husband or go into a field and meet God. But you gotta meet them halfway.
Drawing down godliness into the world, when God bursts into the world, that's very overwhelming, right? That's it's sort of monodirectional. There's no place for people in that equation. It shows up, I think, as awe or as fear, and that's what Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are.
Days of awe, days of ah.
The days of ah. So the question he's playing out here is if that's top down, what happens from below before you get to that moment
Right.
in Elul, right? Because Elul precedes these high holidays, he's pointing out there actually may be something that happens ground up that you do, that you can do, that we as people can do during Elul before in preparation for this elevated moment of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which are top down.
Okay, so the next paragraph goes on to say, as it says, his left arm is under my head and his right arm embraces me. His left arm is under my head. This is the time period from Rosh Hashanah until Yom Kippur. It's the quality of the left hand because this is the time of the revelation of the divine regency. Thus, God is called the King because the divine royalty has dominion over all of the worlds. This means that even the hidden, supernal, or interior worlds fall into fear/awe and trembling before the King. This day is when God's dominion is revealed, and thus the fear/awe. This is the quality of, and my beloved is mine.
This time period of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is in this aspect, in this illusion, the spirit of fear and trembling, right? It's God revealed as dominion, as a monarch, and as it maps onto I am my beloved and my beloved is mine. This is the latter part of that verse, which is my beloved is mine. God is coming down to meet us. So he finishes this passage with this last note by saying, you need to first arouse the divine love and awe, right? And awe
Mm.
has two connotations in the classical imagination. One is the awe that's built on fear, and the other is the awe that's built on love, which is in Elul, before you experience it from above on Rosh Hashanah.
Okay, this concept can be illustrated by way of an analogy. Before a king enters a city, its inhabitants go out to greet him and receive him in the field. At that time, anyone who so desires may approach and greet him. He receives them all pleasantly and shows a smiling countenance to all. As he proceeds to his city, they follow him. Afterwards, when he reaches the royal palace, one may only enter his throne room with permission, and this is granted only to the nation's elite, to a select few. God's self is having a picnic in the field. Anybody can join. Security is lax. You can just come on by, BYOB. So this is our time before the VIP doors close to get that FaceTime with God. But in this case, VIP is just like very spiritually devoted, not like I am the elite of the community. No, you're very spiritually elite.
Right? What's the difference between having an audience with a king in the palace, right, in the throne room, versus meeting a king out in the field?
Pomp, circumstance, aesthetics, a lack of approachability, a certain amount of trepidation and fear. Like it's giving a little bit of like Queen Esther going to the king in the Purim story, going to the throne room and thinking to herself, oh my God, am I gonna die right now if the king doesn't feel like seeing me and having me approach? Like it's a different vibe than a fun picnic in a field where anybody can join. All you're gonna fear there is like ants and wild animals coming to steal your sandwich. It's almost like Hitbodedut Dut versus structured prayer in a synagogue.
Amazing. So I think the comparison to Esther in the palace is a good one because, right, we know that in the Yom Kippur liturgy, right, there is this like very vulnerable, very volatile sensation for the high priest, for the people, for the leader of the congregation. So like you got to be on your best behavior. And there's pomp and circumstance, as you said. There's protocol. It's very formal, right? There's a very restrictive, severe nature to this interaction. I'd also say it's very hierarchical, right?
Yeah.
Like when you show up in the king's palace, the king is on the throne. There's guards around. There like you could cut the tension with a knife, right? And you show up, right? Even if you are spiritually devout or wealthy or have high status, you got to bend the knee. That's not quite the case when you go meet the king out in the field, decontextualized by this like hierarchies of power, right? And you have the chance to build the relationship with this ruler. If you start in the field, you actually can get the king in their benevolence and build the relationship that way. Let's play out here how the Alter Rebbe explains the analogy. He says, in the month of Elul, we go out to receive the light of God's face in the field, so to speak. As it is written, God will cause God's countenance to shine upon you. That's from the blessing over the children. This refers to an emanation of the 13 attributes of mercy in a manner that allows them to be received face to face. And what this is a reference to here, and this comes from the Midrash Tanchuma, when Moses goes back up to Sinai a second time after breaking the tablets, and God invites him back up onto Sinai to receive the second pair of tablets. God also gives Moses the 13 qualities of God's self. And these are classically described as attributes of mercy. And according to the Midrash, if you play out the calendar of what happened that year, that day that Moses went back up on the mountain was the first day of Elul. God is actually like giving us a leg up or giving us the way forward in navigating this tension between God's mercy and God's justice. When you reach the royal palace, right, you're not starting from nothing. God goes out to the field to make God's self available.
Okay, I have to make a fantasy literature analogy, or else what am I doing? In the Fellowship of the Ring, there's this king, Aragorn. He's in exile, wandering all over the world, taking care of everybody, and not a lot of people know he is the king. He's just out here literally in the fields of the Shire, the fields of Rohan, the fields of the Pelennor. He's a ranger, he's out in nature. He doesn't appear kingly. And the hobbits first meet him in an inn, the Prancing Pony, a place you go to have a beer and a casual convo and accidentally put on that magic ring you're not supposed to be putting on while you're waiting for Gandalf to show up. But then by the time you get to the third book, Return of the King, it's almost time for him to like embrace who he really is, King Elessar, the Elf Stone of Gondor, but he can't accept that role until the defeat of Sauron and the destruction of the ring, which is an amazing analogy for the Yetzer Hara, the evil influence inside of each of us. But Aragorn does enter the capital city of Gondor, Minas Tirith, which has seven rings of the city, which is very Kabbalistic, I think. But he enters to heal people at the houses of healing after this huge battle. That's the only reason he enters the city, because he knows it's not time yet for him to assume that king role. So that's how they first get to know him. The people of the city first get to know him by his healing. And the saying is, the hands of the king are hands of a healer. And then he leaves the city and people can come out to meet with him, but he's actually has a tent in the field, literally. But when he comes back to Gondor after the defeat of Sauron, back for his coronation, one of the healers at the houses of healing who had seen him before is like, oh my God, I just saw him take care of all of these people. I already met him and he knows more about healing than I do. And she feels like she has a personal like knowledge and relationship and respect for him because of having seen him before. And at this point, he does become slightly more unreachable. He ascends, he's coronated, he's reunited with the Shekhinah, I mean Arwen. And that's he becomes the king. But she first had that interaction with him without him being in that role. And then when the hobbits and Gandalf go back to that very same inn where they first met Aragorn, the innkeeper is like, wow, I didn't know there's a king who would care about us now. He's hundreds of miles away in his big chair. He doesn't really know about us. And Gandalf's like, no, he loves the Prancing Pony and he really likes your beer. And he used to sit in that armchair over there. And he's not a stranger. You already know him. It's Strider, aka Aragorn.
This idea that the hands of the king are the hands of the healer. Like that is such a beautiful image when you re-meet the king, right? And again, to bring it back and close us off with Anila Dodiva Dodi Li, I am my beloved and my beloved is to me, right? If you were just to meet the king in that moment, those hands would not look like a healer's hands, right? They would be a ruler's hands, and there would be this awe that is built on fear, right? But as the woman knows, right? Those are a healer's hands, and the relationship is of healing and of the awe that's built on love, and that's how you can proceed when you meet the king again in the palace.
It's so important to know these things so we know, where do these phrases come from? Where do these concepts come from? So thank you so much for learning with me today.
Thank you.